And clearly, in the wake of October 7th, you're looking at Hamas terrorists who murder 1,200 people, who rape women, who murder children. And I'll tell you, it was sickening. A number of us sat here. The chairman of this committee arranged for us to listen to stories of the horrors that came on. Why does the Biden administration look at that and say, clearly what we need to do is sanction Israeli Jews, but we don't sanction Hamas. We don't sanction Hamas terrorists for using human shields, and you don't sanction the Palestinian Authority for essentially offering rewards for the murder of civilians. Why not?
Senator, President Biden and the administration have been very clear that the United States stands behind Israel's right to defend itself against these attacks.
Okay.
We also have imposed...
Except for the fact that you are only sanctioning our friends and you're not sanctioning our enemies.
Okay, if that clip didn't stop you in your tracks, I don't know what will. What you just watched is Senator Ted Cruz taking apart a panel of Biden administration officials in one of the most important Senate hearings most people have never seen. And by the time we get through the full video together, you'll understand exactly why clips like this get buried by the algorithm. I want to be upfront. I'm not here to cheerlead for any political party, but I am here to call it like I see it. And what I see is a man asking the exact questions the American people deserve answered, facing a panel that is either unable or unwilling to answer them. We're talking about Hamas. Iran, a serial child rapist placed in a women's prison. A judicial nominee tied to a Marxist organization calling for abolishing the police. These are not abstract political debates. These are issues affecting real people's lives. So here's what I need you to do right now. If you're new here, hit subscribe because this is exactly what we do on this channel. If you've been here a while, you already know. Drop a comment with your first reaction to that clip, and share this video because more people need to see this conversation. All right, watch the full video and come back. We have a lot to talk about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Woodhouse. Position of sanctions coordinator is supposed to oversee and implement sanctions in an objective and nonpartisan way. In examining your record during the Biden administration, I've become concerned that you are singularly unqualified for this position. Far too often, the Biden administration has politicized sanctions. This administration has used sanctions as a bludgeon against countries and international figures whom Democrats don't like, while ignoring much more significant violations by those embraced by the global populist left. You have sanctioned our friends and ignored our enemies. And the mess on the global stage is a direct result of that. Let's start by talking about Israel and Hamas. Hamas has launched repeated wars against Israel during the Biden administration, injuring, kidnapping, murdering thousands of people, including dozens of Americans. They know they cannot defeat Israel militarily, so their fundamental strategy is to use Palestinian human shields to generate Palestinian civilian casualties, and therefore international outrage to damage Israel. To counter that strategy, in 2018, I authored and secured into law mandatory sanctions against Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists for using human shields. In May of 2021, Hamas launched yet another war against Israel, once again using human shields. Mr. Woodhouse, how many Hamas terrorists did you sanction for using human shields during this conflict?
Thank you for that question, Senator. During the Biden administration, we have released multiple rounds of sanctions targeting both Hamas and its financial networks in the region and globally, seeking to continue to degrade its ability to operate and perpetrate these awful crimes against Israel.
So I understand you want to make a generic statement. I want to ask the question again because it's precise. How many Hamas terrorists did you sanction for using human shields during the 2021 conflict?
With respect to SHIELD Act sanctions, I'll have to get back to you. I don't have that number currently.
Well, I can help you on it. That number was 0. You did not sanction anybody, and that's why you don't have the number, because there's not an answer to give. All right, let's move forward. Hamas sanctions, they use human shields. You've got a mandatory obligation to sanction them, but this administration doesn't want to, because in a conflict between the Palestinians and Israel, this administration has decided that you're for the Palestinians and against Israel. Recently, you exercised the other half of that. This administration sanctioned Israelis. Those sanctions were imposed pursuant to a new executive order that imposes crippling sanctions on, quote, persons undermining peace, security, and stability in the West Bank. Critics have rightly said that this executive order and your imposition of sanctions is meant to target only Israeli Jews living in Judea and Samaria. The administration has claimed in your talking points that the sanctions are neutral. So if it's neutral, it ought to be pretty simple to answer this question. The Palestinian Authority gives hundreds of millions of dollars to terrorists who murder Jews. These are pay-to-slay payments, which they call martyrs' funds. How many sanctions have you imposed on the Palestinian Authority or Palestinian officials for paying for the murder of Jews?
Thank you for that question, Senator. The program that you just referenced has been very recently established. There's been one round of sanctions imposed under that program. I can't preview future action.
All on Jews?
Expect the first round did, the targets were all Israeli. Yes.
Well, and clearly in the wake of October 7th, you're looking at Hamas terrorists who murder 1,200 people, who rape women, who murder children. And I'll tell you, it was sickening. A number of us sat here. The chairman of this committee arranged for us to listen to stories of the horrors that came on. Why does the Biden administration look at that and say, clearly what we need to do is sanction Israeli Jews, but we don't sanction Hamas. We don't sanction Hamas terrorists for using human shields, and you don't sanction the Palestinian Authority for essentially offering rewards for the murder of civilians. Why not?
Senator, President Biden and the administration have been very clear that the United States stands behind Israel's right to defend itself against these attacks.
Okay.
We also have imposed...
Except for the fact that you are only sanctioning our friends and you're not sanctioning our enemies. All right, my time has expired, but I want to ask one last thing. You've screwed up sanctions in the Middle East. You've screwed up sanctions in Latin America, which could be an entire other round of questioning. But let me end with this. Screwing up sanctions also caused the war in Ukraine. If you knew in 2021 that allowing Nord Stream 2 to be physically completed would convince Vladimir Putin that he was able to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure and then invade Ukraine, would you still have made the same decisions you made then about Nord Stream 2 to give Putin a multi-billion-dollar gift and an invitation to invade Ukraine?
Thank you, Senator. When Russia began that invasion, they had already heard from the president, standing next to German Chancellor Scholz, that if Russia invaded, Nord Stream 2 would be no more. And Chancellor Scholz said that there was no disagreement.
If Russia so did that work? I find your answer astonishing.
Well, Nord Stream 2 is no more.
Are you claiming responsibility for that?
No.
You'll make news if you're saying that.
No.
I'm not aware of that. Well, then that can't be your answer. If that's not what you're saying, you smirk and say Nord Stream 2 is no more, but your gift, refusing to enforce the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, caused the invasion. My question, which you didn't answer, if you knew then what you know now, would you still have given that gift to Putin and started the war?
Senator, the decision that we had to make in 2021 was a pipeline that was almost complete. The Secretary has been clear.
Are you going to answer the question? Would you have made the same decision knowing what you know now, yes or no?
The decision that we had to make at that time was based on the facts and the realities available at that time.
It was staggeringly wrong. All of us told you it was staggeringly wrong. You didn't listen to us, and it caused the war because you put ideology above the interest of America and above the interest of our allies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your 2023 U.S. Attorney Investiture speech, you highlighted the challenges you believe America faces and what justice means. You said, quote, "We're experiencing a long overdue reckoning with racism in the criminal justice system." Mr. Ritz, what part of the criminal justice system needs a long overdue reckoning?
Senator, what I was describing were a number of things that have happened in recent years in this country that framed, I would say, in some ways, the work that we do in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Is the American justice system systematically racist?
That is not a sentiment that I hold. To the degree there is a definition of what being systematically racist means, I understand some individuals have pointed to disparities in sentencing and that type of thing, but that's not a view that I have.
So that's not a view that you have. That was your testimony. Well, you also said, quote, "There cannot be one rule of law for people who look like me and another for people of color." That sure sounds like the view you just said you didn't have. Do you believe that's our system, that our justice system has one rule of law for people that look like you and a different rule of law for people of color?
No, what I said is that absolutely we cannot have one rule of law for people who look like me and another for people of color. We cannot have one rule of law for the powerless and another for the... There's just one rule of law. That's what I said.
You also said, when asked if the criminal justice system is systematically racist, you said, quote, "There are structural barriers and disparate outcomes that communities of color experience in our society, separate and apart from any individual's views or intentions." Now, that again seems to be saying the same thing that you're saying you weren't saying. I'm just trying to understand what your views are.
And Senator, that was my attempt in that written question to grapple with, again, what was being asked by systematic racism. I understand some have pointed to structural barriers and disparate outcomes.
So what are the barriers and outcomes you're referring to?
I can think of one prominent example that I've had some experience with, which is the disparity in cocaine sentencing between crack sentencing and powder sentencing. This body has addressed those disparities on multiple occasions, and that has been, as I understand it, something that people have addressed as a result of disparities.
Okay, you also said in responses to questions for the record that, as the Attorney General has explained, everyone has implicit biases. So what are your implicit biases?
Senator, I understand implicit bias to refer to unconscious bias that exists below the level of consciousness, and so to the degree I have implicit biases, I think we all do. I think that's partly the point.
So everyone's a racist whether they know it or not?
And that's, I would say that everyone might have implicit biases, and I don't know what.
So what's the difference between bias and prejudice?
I think there can be a lot of overlap in those things. It depends, I think, on the context.
So you're saying everyone is prejudiced?
That's not what I said, Senator.
You just said everyone has implicit biases, and you said that bias and prejudice, I think your words were, there's a lot of overlap.
I think that's right, and I understand implicit bias, and I'm not an expert on the subject, to refer to a set of biases that may exist under a conscious level. So,
since you talk about these implicit bias issues, have you taken a so-called implicit bias test?
We received training that was put on during the last administration in our office on implicit bias. I attended that training in our office.
And what did you take a test?
I don't believe there was a test associated with that, Senator.
Okay, you also said, quote, "But you should know that for justice, for me, is about more than putting people in prison. For me, it's also about who votes and how hard it is to cast that vote. It's about where pipelines or bus routes go. Justice is about whether people in all zip codes can get a loan, whether women have access to health care." That's an interesting statement, and in reading it, what's striking is that that's de-emphasizing the core role of a U.S. attorney. The last I checked, a U.S. attorney is not in the policy business of deciding where pipelines go. That's the role of environmental activists and left-wing activists, but is not supposed to be a U.S. attorney. Why was your focus elsewhere?
Senator, and the very next thing I said was that those are not issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis in the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we are primarily focused on enforcing criminal laws. I was seeking to place justice as a broad concept at the center of, to place our work within justice as a broad concept.
So do you agree that Memphis is one of the most dangerous cities in the nation?
It is. We have an intolerable amount of violent crime, and that's why there's no higher priority for us in our office.
Well, there's no higher priority except for pipelines, except for bus routes, except for bank loans, except for implicit bias, except for the fact that everyone is prejudiced. All of those other things are what you're focused on talking about instead of actually locking up bad guys who are murdering and raping and hurting people.
In those same comments, Senator, I said that we don't apologize for seeking significant prison sentences, and that's at the core of what we do. When we have serious violent crime, we seek serious sentences and consequences.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz, and thank you, Mr. Ritz. We appreciate your being here. You may receive some questions in writing. If you'll respond in a prompt fashion, we'd appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
We now make room for the second panel.
Well, Judge Netburn, I want to continue on this line of questioning. In your court, what matters more, the rights of individuals or your political ideology?
I apply the law to the facts.
I asked a question, which matters more?
Well, my political ideology doesn't matter at all.
Okay, so I don't believe you. And I think this case demonstrates that you are willing to subjugate the rights of individuals to satisfy your political ideology. This case involves a male defendant who raped a 9-year-old boy. Was he guilty of that?
Yes, the petitioner pled guilty to that.
Okay, so he raped a 9-year-old boy. He also raped a 17-year-old girl. Was he guilty of that?
He pled guilty, the petitioner pled guilty to that crime as well.
So was he guilty?
I hope so, because she pled guilty to it.
He was a he when he did this.
That's correct.
And also criminal deviant conduct, which the record doesn't disclose what that was exactly. Then, after serving in prison, Mr. McClain was released for parole, but then violated the terms of parole by having internet and was sent back to prison. 1 year after being released again, he was convicted of having child pornography. Is that correct?
I'm unclear on exactly the time frame that you're at, but the petitioner was convicted of distributing child pornography.
Child pornography that was images of adults violently raping children.
Abhorrent conduct.
Okay.
For which there are real victims.
And this individual, 6'2", biologically a man. A minute ago you said that when this man decided that he was a she, you said this individual was, quote, I wrote it down, sober and entirely a female. That phrase struck me as remarkable. Did this individual have male genitalia?
I think what I said, or at least what
that is a verbatim quote, entirely a female.
Sorry, what I meant to say was hormonally a female.
Okay, but that's not entirely. Did this individual have male genitalia?
Yes.
So you took a 6'2" serial rapist, serial child rapist with male genitalia, and he said, you know, I'd like to be in a women's prison. And your answer was, that sounds great to me. Let me ask you something. The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Is that a question you're
yes,
asking me?
the other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Of course.
Do they have the right not to have a 6'2" man who is a repeat serial rapist put in as their cellmate?
Senator Cruz, I considered the facts presented to me, and I reached a decision
I asked
based
you a
on what
question.
the law
I asked
is.
you a question. Do they have a right not to have a 6'2" man who is a serial rapist put in as their cellmate? Do those women have a right to that?
Every person who's incarcerated has the right to be safe in their space.
But you didn't think so. You didn't think so. And in fact, I'm going to give some quotes from your order because Senator Kennedy is right. This is not a judge's order. This is a political activist. By the way, the beginning of your order says, at birth, people are typically assigned a gender. I got to say that would astonish a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans think you go to the hospital, a baby is born, and congratulations, you have a little boy, a little girl. The assigned a gender, I know you went to Brown, but it sounds like it's in a college faculty lounge with no bearing on reality. The Bureau of Prison argued what I'm saying right now, that if you put this person in a female prison, there will be a risk of sexual assault to the women. And you know what you did? You said you didn't care about the women. I'm going to quote what you wrote. You wrote, quote, "The Bureau of Prisons claim penological interest in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. This interest is legitimate," that's kind of you to say, "but there are no signs that petitioner is at risk of reoffending. The record is devoid of evidence of incidents of violence or assault during petitioner's incarceration when she was the perpetrator, only the victim. A theoretical risk of sexual assault by the prisoner without more cannot support the BOP's position. No evidence, theoretical." Have you dealt, in what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at a risk of reoffending?
Senator, as I do in every case.
Okay, I know you've been told to repeat the line, "I follow the law." I asked a question. In what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at risk of reoffending?
Sir, I looked at the facts that were before me in this case. All of the evidence, including the statements of every warden who had supervised this petitioner.
You also wrote, "The BOP also posits that permitting petitioner to live among women will be traumatizing and possibly dangerous to them. This concern is overblown." I have to say, if I were the father of one of those women, and you decided that my daughter's cellmate was going to be a 6'2" man who over and over and over again committed violent sexual assault, I would say the entire justice system is absurd, and it is clear on your record your political ideology matters a heck of a lot more than the rights of those women that you endangered. I think you're a radical, and I think you have no business being a judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Jacobson, you previously served in Tajikistan.
Yes, sir.
Of what period of time?
I was there from 2006 to 2009.
I'm sure you've seen the news that broke this week about 8 Tajiks who came to this country illegally over the southern border, were apprehended by the Biden administration.
Yes, sir.
Were quote-unquote vetted, and then were released. And they've been arrested this week because of their affiliations with ISIS-K and over concerns that they were plotting a major terror attack in the United States. In your experience, how dangerous is ISIS-K?
ISIS-K remains a threat both in the region to which I've been nominated and into the world, and also to our homeland. And I, if confirmed, would sort of welcome the opportunity to further discuss how we can combat this sort of terrorist threat. I'm a little bit out of the loop on Tajikistan in particular, having left there 15 years ago, but of course I still do follow it.
How concerned should Americans be that this administration released 8 illegal aliens who are Tajiks with connections to ISIS-K?
I am not privy to the intelligence or the law enforcement activity or really any of that. I have mostly read about this in the news. But I certainly think it's incumbent on all of us, all the agencies of the U.S. government, to protect our homeland. And
this is the same terrorist group that murdered 145 people in Moscow at the Opera House, came in with automatic weapons and mowed down civilians. Is that right?
It's my understanding that, yes, there were Tajiks involved in that operation in Moscow.
Well, I will say, I can tell you Texans are deeply concerned that the administration keeps releasing illegal immigrants with ties to terrorists, and we are living on borrowed time. I believe there is a higher likelihood today of a major terrorist attack in the United States than there has been any time since September 11th. And this administration's open border with 11 million illegal immigrants coming across it is an invitation for terrorists, for Hamas, for Hezbollah, for Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and for ISIS-K to come and murder Americans. And it is utterly indefensible. And yet today, the Biden administration is releasing yet more illegal immigrants into this country. They do it day after day after day. And we are going to see a lot more dead bodies as a result of it. All right, let's shift topics. A few weeks ago, Secretary Blinken appeared before this committee, and I questioned him about policy decisions made by the Biden administration, which have allowed $100 billion to flow to Iran, including access to a $10 billion pot of money involving Iraqi electricity in euros and dinars. This money enabled the Ayatollah to fund Hamas and Hezbollah. This money funded the October 7th terrorist attack, the single worst one-day massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It is right now funding Hezbollah's push to trigger a regional Middle East war all the way through this morning. Ms. Gavito, you served for 2 years as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iran, Iraq, and Public Diplomacy. Then you became the Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs. What was your role in issuing the waivers giving Iran access to that pot of money?
Thank you very much, Senator. With regard to the $6 billion in question, the
$10 billion, not the
sorry.
not the $6 billion in ransom. That's another problematic decision.
Apologies. With regard to the electricity waivers, I, as Deputy Assistant Secretary, did not have a direct role in that particular decision. That being said, certainly was part of those discussions. As Ambassador Jacobson has noted, the intent behind those waivers was to incentivize the Iraqi government.
I'm not asking about the intent. Did you support those waivers?
I was not in a decision-making capacity.
Did you agree with the decision?
I would have to review, Senator. Yes, I believe that incentivizing Iraq to divest itself of Iranian oil is positive.
Okay, Ambassador Jacobson, these waivers will have to be renewed this summer or they expire. If confirmed, would you support reissuing those waivers?
So I'd note that those waivers have spanned at least 2 administrations and been renewed 21 times since 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I take heart from the commitment of the government of Iraq to achieve energy independence by 2030.
That's not an answer to the question. Would you support reissuing those waivers?
Well, I don't think it would be up to me, and I would be more than interested in serving as part of the conversation.
There is a consistent pattern in this administration of giving money to theocratic lunatics who want to murder us. $100 billion to the Ayatollah Khamenei is the single most catastrophic foreign policy decision of this administration. And today, this administration continues to refuse to enforce the oil sanctions, enriching the Ayatollah, funding Hamas, funding Hezbollah, funding those who are murdering Israelis and trying to murder Americans. How does it make sense to give billions and billions of dollars to theocratic lunatics who want to kill us?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I personally am very clear-eyed about the Iranian threat. I think I shared with you, and I'll share with others, that I have been myself on the receiving end of Iranian death threat information, including during my time in Ashgabat when President Niyazov used to remind me that the Iranians had a missile pointed at my bedroom. With regards to the funds that are kept in restricted accounts that are overseen by the Treasury Department, that are the subject of an extensive system of safeguards, these funds will never reach the government of Iran. These funds have to stay overseas, and they have to be used for humanitarian purposes. You could ask, doesn't that mean that it frees up money for their massive terrorism campaigns, which of course are heinous? And I would argue that Iran, unfortunately, is always going to focus on destabilizing activity over supporting the humanitarian needs of its own people. With regards to the sanctions, the administration hasn't lifted any sanctions, and as far as I know, it's implemented another 700 sanctions.
But it
on Iran.
refuses to enforce them. My time's expired, but the results are indisputable. And Iran has gone from selling 300,000 barrels a day of oil to selling 2 million barrels of oil a day. That is funding this war of terror against us.
Thank you very much, Senator Cruz. Thank you all for your testimony today. We really appreciate your... Oh, Senator Booker. Senator Young. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ambassador Leaf, you are the administration's point person on the Middle East. How's that working out?
I love my job, Senator.
Have things in the Middle East gotten better or worse since Joe Biden became president?
We have had a series of black swan events, so no doubt the region is in a very difficult state.
Is your answer things have gotten worse?
My answer is that a series of black swan events have crowded upon
Have they gotten better? You're not suggesting things have gotten better,
No,
are
I
you?
have not.
In fact, they've gotten a lot worse.
That's the nature of black swan.
So it's black swans. You guys had nothing to do with it. It's not mistakes you made. It's just something that happened externally.
Well, I think an assessment of the events of October 7th is still to be done. I can't speak to that.
Okay, so did y'all make any mistakes that led to it?
I'm not sure.
All right, here's one. How about giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the Gaza Strip, much of which ended up in the hands of Hamas? Was that a mistake now that we saw what happened on October 7th?
I'm going to defer to my colleague from USAID. I'm not aware of hundreds of millions of dollars going to Hamas from U.S. coffers.
All right, how about $100 billion to Iran? Was that a mistake?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, Senator.
Well, you tell me, how much money has this administration flowed to Iran?
We have not flowed money to Iran.
Really?
We have money in accounts that are restricted for humanitarian use only.
And money's not fungible?
This regime will always spend money on these kinds of activities, the proxy activities.
When Joe Biden became president, how much was Iran selling in oil a day?
I don't have that figure for you, Senator.
Of course you don't. The answer is about 300,000 barrels a day. How much is Iran selling in oil a day now?
Somewhere short of 2 million.
So it went from 300,000 barrels a day to 2 million barrels a day. That's about $80 billion that the Ayatollah has made because your administration refuses to enforce oil sanctions.
No, we do enforce oil sanctions.
Well, you do so terribly because the number has increased almost tenfold.
But because of the strictures that we put on, the sanctions that we put on, the targeting that we've done, 230 alone directed towards those who traffic in Iranian oil, that has imposed a heavy cost on Iran, and we estimate that
Wait. You're saying it's a heavy cost.
Mm-hmm.
They went from 300,000 barrels a day to 2 million barrels a day. Where's the heavy cost? That's an extra 1.7 million barrels a day. That's $80 billion. True or false, 90% of Hamas's funding comes from Iran?
No, not 90%. It is a large, it's a
Okay, how much is it
substantial
then?
amount. I don't know at this
Of course, you're in charge of the damn region, and you don't. What do you mean you don't know?
At this exact moment, I can't tell you.
All right, how
because
much of
the
Hezbollah's
strictures-
funding comes from Iran?
Huge amount.
It's about 90%. Both of those are about 90%. Do you think it made the world safer or less safe to take a theocratic lunatic like the Ayatollah who chants death to America and death to Israel and to flow $100 billion? Did that make us more safe or less safe?
The U.S. is not flowing money to Iran, Senator.
What about the $6 billion in hostage payments?
Not a penny is moved.
And money's not fungible? They
Not a
can't put
penny
that
is
up for
moved.
credit facilities?
Not a penny is moved.
You're where you're under oath.
I am.
And could they put that money up for credit facilities to use money to fund their terror activity?
I'm not sure who would be in the position of lending them money at this point, Senator. We do have plenty of sanctions. Iran is one of the most heavily sanctioned
But you're not enforcing
regimes.
them. This administration, every lunatic on earth that wants to kill us, this administration gives money to. All right, let me ask you this. Israel has said it is their policy to utterly eliminate Hamas. Does this administration, does President Biden support Israel in its commitment to utterly eliminate Hamas?
Of course.
Of course, then why are you calling for an immediate ceasefire before they eliminate Hamas?
Israel has accepted that proposal.
No, they have not.
They have.
Is there a ceasefire that's happened?
Hamas has not yet fully accepted
Is there a Israel most certainly has not. I'm aware the Biden administration has told the press that Israel has.
The Israeli leadership.
So I asked you a question. Do you support Israel's military objective of utterly eliminating Hamas? You said yes, and the next sentence you said, but they should cease fire right now and not eliminate Hamas.
No, I agree with the way that the president characterized it, Senator, on May 31st, which is to say that we agree with the objective that Hamas never again control the Gaza Strip or threaten Israel. That will not be achieved by military means alone.
So it's not no, we said their military objective was to defeat Hamas. So you just said it's impossible to defeat Hamas.
When you
is that
first
right?
posed the question, you said eliminate Hamas.
I said utterly eliminate Hamas. I didn't say over time, not over 1,000 years. I said defeat an enemy because they are murderers who murdered 1,200 people, who raped women and little girls.
It won't be done by military means alone.
Okay, so it is the position of this administration it is impossible by military means to defeat Hamas.
Yes, it is.
Let me ask you, you also want to see, essentially as a reward for October 7th, a Palestinian state.
It's not a reward.
It's not a reward. It just achieves what they want as a benefit for these murders. Let me ask you something. If Hamas is governed by Hamas, if Hamas governs Gaza, how is Israel's safety protected? It's an impressive job, Mr. Chairman. Bang, bang.
Let the witness finish answering the
You
question.
should not be frightened of these questions, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Hamas has never supported a two-state solution. So indeed, a Palestinian state that is negotiated with Israel, that lives in peace side by side
And
with
governed by
Israel,
Hamas.
is not a reward to Hamas. Hamas doesn't support such a thing, does not recognize Israel's right to exist.
Your policy has been an utter disaster. Judge Lopez, I'm going to quickly note there's a reason the Democrats have scheduled you on this panel, because you have a long pattern of sentencing criminal defendants to egregiously light sentences, including one child molester who molested a 4-year-old and 9-year-old, and you sentenced him to only 6 years in prison, including, as we heard before, one woman who was responsible for killing her 1-year-old son, who was coated in fentanyl. His pajamas were coated in fentanyl. His sheets were coated in fentanyl. You could have sentenced her to 30 years. You sentenced her to only 4 years. It's an egregious pattern, but the reason you're put on this panel is the Democrats know that most Republicans will not have time to question you about that terrible record, because your colleague on this panel, her record is even worse. Ms. Campbell, I will say I have seen some astonishing nominees from this administration, but I have to admit your record takes the cake. A judge should not be a political activist. Your record demonstrates to me a long history of being a political activist, but not just an activist who affiliates with extreme and radical organizations. Now, when Senator Grassley asked you about the Workers' Dignity Organization, you gave, I think, deliberately misleading answer. You said you did not represent them, and that convinced Senator Grassley not to continue on that line of questioning. You have been a legal advisor to that organization since 2013. That is what you have publicly printed on your AVO biography. It is what has been described in the Tennessee Bar Association when you were nominated. It explicitly says she served as a legal advisor for local workers' rights nonprofit Workers' Dignity. Now, why is it you're distancing yourself from them? The reason is because they are utterly radical. If you look at this group that you've served as the legal advisor for over a decade, this is an openly Marxist organization. This is a communist organization. Now, those words are not said lightly. According to their own characterization of their views, this group says there's no election outcome that improves conditions for workers. The laws of this country have never worked for our people, and now that the system is crumbling, we will continue to stand in community and solidarity with each other. The only way we win in a world we deserve is by building a multiracial working class revolution that can push out white nationalism, violent state racism, and the capitalist class that is desperately clutching to hold control and profits as the people rise up. Why have you spent a decade as a legal advisor to an openly communist and Marxist organization? I don't think your microphone's on.
I apologize, Senator. If I could briefly clarify, more than a decade ago, probably for the course of 2 or 3 years, I served on an advisory board that helped this, at the time, was supposed to be a nonprofit workers' rights organization get set up and get started.
Did you know they were a communist organization?
Senator, at that time, they did not express these kinds of views. It was an organization.
So this is new. This wasn't the case then.
Yes, and I have not been affiliated with them in more than a decade.
You're aware that your current profile that you have up, your legal bio, says you are right now an advisor to them.
I apologize for any confusion about that.
So your testimony under oath, and that's all right, the facts will come out, but your testimony, I want to make it explicit. Your testimony under oath is that you have done absolutely nothing and had zero contact with them for how long?
I have not served on their advisory board for...
You've done absolutely nothing and had zero contact with them for how long? Please answer the question.
Many, many years.
How many?
I don't know, sitting here today. It's been many years.
If you look at other statements from this organization, because they are radicals. They are radicals. If you look also, this is the same group in 2020. They called for abolishing ICE, abolishing prisons and detention centers, and abolishing the police. Why did you volunteer for a communist organization that calls for abolishing ICE and abolishing the police?
Senator, I have never seen these comments before.
You didn't know who you were volunteering for?
I was not a volunteer for them at that time.
You were a legal advisor. Were you paid?
No, I was
Then
not.
you were a volunteer. If you volunteered to be a legal advisor, you were a volunteer. Why did you volunteer? Do you support abolishing ICE?
Senator, at this time, I had...
Do you support abolishing ICE?
I do not, Senator.
Well, it's amazing because a minute ago you also told Senator Graham that the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition that has a manifesto calling for abolishing ICE, you said you had nothing to do with it, which is fairly astonishing because on page 3 of their manifesto, they thank you by name for what they say. We would like to thank the following individuals and organizations for their thoughtful feedback and input. This platform would not have been possible without their expertise. Are they lying?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that manifesto.
Are they lying? Did you provide any assistance? Did you give feedback and input, which is what they say on the cover page?
Senator, I didn't even know that existed, and so no, I did not provide input on it.
I'm going to shift to Mr. Desai. Mr. Desai, you were general counsel to a major defense contractor. As vice president and general counsel for Honeywell International, you described your role as, quote, regularly providing advice regarding compliance with applicable international traffic in arms regulations. You've been at Honeywell since 2015. As you know, your employer faced significant and disturbing allegations of selling classified defense secrets to the People's Republic of China. Is that correct?
Senator, Honeywell International entered into a consent agreement with the Department of State regarding...
Is that a yes?
Senator, Honeywell successfully completed its consent agreement in connection...
Is that a yes? There were allegations that Honeywell sold military secrets to the People's Republic of China?
Senator, I'm not aware of any allegations of Honeywell selling any secrets.
In 28, so they just gave, okay. All right, I'll take your friendly amendment. They just gave military secrets. They exported technical data to China in violation of federal law of the tactical Tomahawk missile, the B-1B Lancer long-range strategic bomber, the F-22 fighter aircraft, the T-55, and CTS-800 turboshaft engines. Sadly, this appeared to be a long practice at the company. The State Department stated that between 2011 and 2015, Honeywell also exported drawings of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, of the B-1B Lancer long-range strategic bomber, and multiple other military weapons. Do you think it is appropriate for a federal judge to have presided over federal compliance at a company giving military trade secrets to the People's Republic of China?
Senator, at the time of the alleged exports, I was not responsible for that portion of the business. I was a litigation counsel in the business. Honeywell has successfully completed its consent agreement.
Are you saying you had no involvement with the issue?
Not at the time of the export, Senator.
What was your involvement?
Senator, I participated in Honeywell's work to successfully satisfy the conditions of the consent agreement. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're back. If you watched the whole thing, you're probably feeling one of two things right now. Either energized or deeply unsettled. Honestly, I felt both. Let me start with what I think is the single most damning exchange in the whole hearing. Cruz asks the sanctions coordinator one simple question. How many Hamas terrorists did you sanction for using human shields during the 2021 conflict? The answer, after fumbling and giving a generic speech about multiple rounds of sanctions, was 0. Not a low number. Not we're working on it. 0. And what makes that even more striking is that Cruz himself authored the law that made those sanctions mandatory. This was not optional. It was a legal obligation the Biden administration simply chose to ignore. And when given the chance to explain why, the best they could offer was bureaucratic non-answers. That should concern everyone watching regardless of where you stand politically. Then we get to Iran, and this is where Cruz lands some of his heaviest hits. The numbers don't lie. When Biden took office, Iran was selling around 300,000 barrels of oil per day. By the time of this hearing, that number had grown to nearly 2 million barrels a day. That works out to roughly $80 billion flowing to the Ayatollah because this administration chose not to enforce sanctions already on the books. And where does that money go? It funds Hamas. It funds Hezbollah. It funded October 7th. When Cruz presses Ambassador Leaf on this, the response boils down to, well, we have sanctions. They're just not working that well. That is not a defense. That is an admission. The Nord Stream 2 exchange was something else. Cruz asked the most direct question possible. If you knew then what you know now, would you have made the same decision? Yes or no? The official refused to answer it. Just kept retreating into the facts and realities available at that time. That tells you everything. A person who genuinely believed they made the right call would just say yes. The fact that they wouldn't says it all. Now the Judge Netburn section is genuinely difficult to sit through. We have a serial rapist who violated a 9-year-old boy and a 17-year-old girl, later picked up child pornography charges, and then declared himself a woman. Netburn's ruling put him in a women's prison. Cruz asks what should be a simple question. Do the other women in that prison have rights? The response is evasive. The Bureau of Prisons raised the exact concern Cruz raises, that placing this individual in a women's facility creates a real risk of sexual violence, and the judge's written order dismissed that concern as overblown. Not weighed carefully, just overblown. When you are talking about a documented serial predator, there is no world in which that risk assessment makes any sense. The Campbell exchange might actually be the most shocking moment in the whole hearing for me. It is one thing to have political views. It is another thing to sit before a Senate committee and give testimony that contradicts what is publicly written on your own professional biography. Cruz points to the Workers' Dignity Organization, a group that has publicly called for abolishing IC, abolishing the police, and abolishing prisons, and Campbell's response is essentially that she barely knew them and hasn't been involved in years. But her own legal bio still listed her as an active advisor. Under oath, with that contradiction sitting right on the table. That is a serious problem for someone seeking a lifetime federal judicial appointment. The Honeywell exchange at the end is worth noting even though Cruz ran out of time to fully develop it. The core question is legitimate. If you are being nominated as a federal judge and your employer was found to have illegally exported classified military data on the F-35, the B-1B bomber, and the tactical Tomahawk missile to China, that deserves a full and transparent answer. Not corporate boilerplate about successfully completing a consent agreement. Here is the big picture takeaway for me. What Cruz does in this hearing, and what gets him unfairly dismissed by people who disagree with him politically, is he comes prepared. He knows the specific laws. He knows the specific numbers. He knows the specific documents. He asks precise questions and holds people to precise answers. And when those answers reveal something important, 0 sanctions issued, a Marxist organization still on someone's current bio, Iran going from 300,000 to 2 million barrels a day, he does not let anyone bury it in talking points. You can disagree with Ted Cruz on plenty of things. But in this hearing, he is doing exactly what a senator is supposed to do. Checking executive power, demanding accountability, and speaking up for the people whose safety these decisions directly affect. That is my read. Now I want yours. Which exchange hit hardest for you? Was there anything you think Cruz pushed too far? Let me know in the comments. I read all of them. And if this video gave you something to think about, please share it. This kind of accountability only gets seen when people like you pass it along. See you in the next one.